Speed limit signs can sometimes be difficult to spot, but often we can use our environment to get an idea of the speed limit. In most cases, in the city, unless otherwise stated, the speed limit is 50 kilometers an hour. If you're approaching a park or a school, especially a primary school or a park, and you see playgrounds for children, look around for a 30 kilometer an hour panel. There's a high probability that this is a 30 kilometer zone. Pay attention as well to controlling your speed on slopes. We tend to go too fast when going downhill and too slow when going uphill. So if you're already at the speed limit when approaching a downward slope, release the accelerator and if necessary, apply the brakes a little. When going uphill, accelerate a bit to maintain your speed. A frequent cause of failure in exams is inappropriate speed. Inappropriate speed is when you drive too fast depending on the context, even if you're not exceeding the limit. Example, in an area where the speed limit is 50, but the road is covered with snow, 50 is too fast. This is also the case when you pass near people getting out of their cars, pedestrians crossing the street, and so on. In this case, always maintain a sufficient safety margin. If necessary, keep your foot over the brake in case you have to brake in an emergency. The best thing to do in this case is to change lanes. Pay attention also to respect the speed limits in parking lots, which is always lower than on the streets, 15 in this case. Don't forget to always put your flasher and do your verifications, mirrors and blind spots before changing lanes. You cannot change lanes on a solid line or in an intersection, therefore pay attention when approaching intersections. There is often a solid line right before them. If you make several successive lane changes, you have to stop your flasher, put it back on again, and do the verifications for each lane change. A little trick to know if the car in the lane you want to go into is far enough to change lanes. If you see the car completely in the mirror, it's far enough. If you don't, it means you don't have a safe distance to do so. Another very common mistake, new drivers often tend to wait too long before changing lanes before a turn. Do it in advance, at least a block or two before turning, if possible. Two mistakes are frequently committed by novice drivers at yields. One, they always look at the last second before committing, and two, they tend to spill over into the second lane when turning. Be sure to watch from a distance when approaching a yield. Watch at least 3 times, from far, then a bit before the yield, and finally, immediately before committing. Watching the traffic lights for the other cars can also help. There are mainly 2 types of yields. Those whose lane is reserved for us, meaning that the cars coming from the street where we want to go are coming in the second lane, and those whose path is shared, meaning that cars coming from the street where we want to go are coming in the lane we want to go into. Pay particular attention to the latter. Normally, when the yield has a reserved lane for us, there's a solid line separating the 2 lanes. When approaching a yellow light, you must always stop if it can be done safely, meaning there is no danger of being hit by the car following us or of finishing our braking in the intersection. 2 tips we can use to know if the light will turn yellow soon are: 1. The countdown for pedestrians. In many cases the light turns yellow when the countdown reaches 0. And 2. If the light that we're approaching has been green for a long time. Basically, arriving at a yellow light, we must ask ourselves the question, do I have time to stop? Instead of, do I have time to pass it? After a turn, you should always take the first available lane. Something that very few people do in everyday life, as you can see here. At the exam, it is very important to do it. If the first lane is blocked by parked cars, or if it's a reserved lane, go into the next available lane. In this case, the second. If you just turn into a boulevard with 3 or more lanes, if possible, don't stay in the extreme left or right lanes. The left lane is for those who want to go faster, and in the right lane, there may be parked cars, buses, or other obstacles. I call this mistake the path of least resistance. Especially in residential areas, people tend to cut a little too diagonally when turning left. It can be very dangerous because you risk a head-on collision. Be careful to stay on your side of the road. So even if there are no lines on the asphalt, Imagine one that separates the street in both directions. A relatively recent law, the Move Over Law, was established to protect police officers as well as certain other employees of road services. If you're approaching a police car stopped on the side of the road which has its sirens going, you must leave at least one lane between you and them if possible. If this is not possible or safe, slow down when passing and keep your foot on the brake so you can intervene if necessary. I hope you liked this video. Good luck for your exam.